So now, as we think about the biggest possible picture here, if we just step back and look at the U.S. as the leader economically, geopolitically in the West, as we call it, if we think about China as the primary challenger to the U.S. economically, geopolitically, the assumption has been that over time we would see that gap close. That at some point China might be able to supplant the U.S. At least in geopolitical influence, if not economics. Given the decisions of the last year plus, do you believe that that is has accelerated? Do you believe the U.S. position is still a strong one? That with modifications to a strategy, the U.S. can regain and retain its position as a global leader? Or do you feel we are watching a paradigm shift in real time from one great power to another?
I wouldn't call at this point China a great power simply because it's in a outside this U.S. component. It's on a very backward streak economically and politically speaking, and I'll get to that in a moment. But it is very clear that U.S. is walking back, abandoning its leadership on all fronts: geopolitical, economic, diplomatic. It's abandoning long term relationships that took decades to cultivate, and it's abandoning its positions in favor of seemingly muscular but extremely reactionary short term and tactical policy on one front. It's actually causing a lot of resentment and creating unintended consequences such as networks, such as loss of intelligence cooperation, such as great deal of distrust, which could leave U.S. isolated and significantly weakened domestically and in terms of external position. What I mean about China on being on a backwards trajectory is that separately and apart from that, and while China has certainly opportunistically tried to exploit the vacuum of power that is being presented by U.S. withdrawal from the international scene, its own policies are also alienating a lot of potential supporters. She has been an extremely nationalistic leader in a way that has been off-putting to many. For the first time, NATO has decided that China is actually a national security threat and not just an economic competitor. It has been reviewing its policy, which is a big shift from even a few years ago. That's not to say that that all the European countries or Canada will suddenly abandon their interest in China. In fact, if nothing else, the U.S. Meddling in Canadian elections has pushed the country closer to China. But overall, and while China is trying to make good business everywhere and advance cultural ties, there's also a lot of backlash because its policies have been so extreme. It has been driving Western companies out of its own borders to its own economic detriment. It has been accused of racism by a number of African countries that are now looking for partnerships, if not with the U.S., then with Japan, India, South Korea, the European Union, and other, even Turkey and other middle powers. We are seeing that uh, that India, while is still very far from being an equal competitor to China, is certainly on the rise in many ways and is strategically moving to provide itself as a both a connectivity, geopolitical, and a security alternative, and Chinese influence in every way. In some ways, more successful than others. But if China keeps the same extreme approach, it will force countries out of its sphere of influence, just as it has previously won them away from the United States. So yes, U.S. is losing that influence, but China is only gaining it because of this, not because of its own merit so much, but because of U.S. absence. Should U.S. positions shift, I think many countries would be all too happy to distance themselves from at least some aspects of Chinese China envisioned world order, which, and for those who are not aware, the Chinese view of one world, one family, and so forth is actually placing China in the singular dominant position of the one and only superpower, with everyone essentially being a tributary and a very junior partner, not an equal in any sense of the way. And I think many countries, especially bigger ones like India, are very resentful of that view, even if they find it immediately lucrative to do business with China, especially with the US being absent.